would like to request James to share his thoughts with us. James Mwangi, Global Managing Partner, Dalberg Global Development Advisors, his comment saying, "Our challenge in Africa is ultimately to combine prosperity and purpose. You can't do it with one or the other, it has to be both." And these were the words that over 50 heads of state in Africa hung on to when James made his address recently at a conference. An alum of Harvard, an ex-McKinsey man, who has been awarded the Archbishop Desmond Tutu Leadership Fellowship, we welcome James Mwangi.
Thank you very much. It's an absolute privilege to be here. It's a bit of a trip from Johannesburg, but it's very worthwhile. I'm deeply enjoying my time in Singapore. And I would like to really thank the organizers of IIMPACT, both for putting together what's an amazing event, but more importantly, for giving me a way to impress my father-in-law. He is a 1973 alum of IIM Ahmedabad. And when he heard, that I was going to be speaking here, he gave a gruff nod and said, "You're finally becoming affiliated with a respectable educational institution." All of you with fathers-in-law will know that that means a lot. Small victories count for a great deal. I struggled a bit to figure out what part of my story to focus on, in part because I suspect I'm a little bit different on a number of dimensions from many of the speakers. My focus in my own career has been in the field of international development initially, and then in Africa, which is not necessarily the first place that a lot of people thinking about business think of first. I am still, I like to think, relatively early in my own both entrepreneurial and career journey. And also very new in some ways to understanding the region in which we are currently based. Having said that, I will start at the beginning. And to me, the beginning has always been that sense for me that ultimately for a career to have meaning, it did need to combine prosperity and a path to prosperity and purpose. Not just for me individually, but as a way of thinking about the work that each of us does in the world. When we started Dalberg, it was right after, in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. I was in New York at the time working at McKinsey. And the events of that period both struck me as a reminder of how short and transient life could be, but also that you couldn't sit insulated in one part of the world, however privileged you had been. And I'd had the privilege to go through the very best academic institutions, work at probably one of the most highly regarded brands in the world. You couldn't just sit there and assume that the challenges of the world wouldn't find you. And so I left McKinsey at that time in pursuit of an opportunity to apply the skills that I'd been building, and in a sense say, how do we bring those skills and consistently target the biggest challenges facing the world? And I met two people who were in the process of launching the firm Dalberg at that time, also leaving McKinsey at exactly that time, to do exactly that. Now at the time, we thought that the way we were going to really change the world was we were going to focus our fantastic consulting skill set on engaging with the UN system and the World Bank and occasionally the odd government and helping them become as or more efficient than the private sector clients we'd all spent a lot of time working with. And we spent the first 3 years of our time building up Dalberg with no capital behind us, essentially earning our way forward, a few people sitting at a borrowed desk at the UN, trying to do exactly that. It was tremendously rewarding work. We learned a lot. We got to meet a lot of very committed people. It was not the basis on which you could build a scalable business. The reality was those institutions were the way they were and struggled with some of the issues they did for very good reasons. And frankly, while you could change them, they could stay difficult to operate longer than we could stay solvent. And so we began to ask ourselves, how do we do two things? Firstly, how do we accelerate the rate at which we realize impact in the world? And putting that at the center of what we are doing. And secondly, how do we also build a business that's viable and actually allows us to attract larger and larger numbers of people? 5 years in, having started with very high hopes, 3 of us, we'd experienced fantastic growth. There were 7 of us. And for that, and we thought, well, we're not really going to change the world at this rate. How do we do it? And we began to experiment with serving a broader range of clients and asking the question, how do you bring the story of development and the challenges of development in developing countries and make it resonate to chief executives, to decision makers of different kinds? So I'll pause there, because the next step we took a few years later, as we were diversifying, was we decided that actually we couldn't, from New York, Washington, D.C., and Geneva, claim to be serving the needs of the world's developing countries. And so people turned to me and said, well, you're from Africa, why aren't you there? Now, I'd grown up in Kenya and I'd always wanted to go back. But moving back meant having already had one tough discussion with my mother and my father-in-law, it should be noted, about why I was leaving McKinsey to go to a place that couldn't pay me a salary, had no name, had no prospects. I was going to say, well, now that this place is a little bit stable and you do have a regular stable of clients, you're going to pack it all up, move to Johannesburg, start with another blank desk and a phone line, and build again from scratch. Luckily, for a range of reasons, everyone, most particularly my wife and family, went along with that idea. And we started again in Johannesburg, launching a business with 3 people, and trying to figure out how do you build a platform in a part of the world that at that point was still dominated by that old Economist headline that labeled Africa the hopeless continent. You can imagine that did not make me very happy to read. And it did characterize a lot of the interactions we had with people. They were driven by a question of how do we address the desperate need in Africa? Now, desperate need attracts a number of emotions, and some of them are very helpful. But you cannot build a sustainable platform for transformation if you're basing yourself purely on the idea of desperate need. We need to talk about opportunity. And so over the next 3 years, during which we built up the Africa business at Dalberg, I went about trying to find people who were willing to leave the very best consulting and private sector jobs available, had an outstanding academic background, were willing to move in many cases to Johannesburg or Nairobi, were willing to take a pay cut, a substantial one, and were willing to come in with no support and no real kind of resources behind them because they believed in what we were doing. I've never had more fun in my life. The team we built was a team of believers, and it proved an axiom that I heard once and I've often repeated. Very often, we as human beings tend to be emotional about the past. How did we feel about things that have happened before? And we tend to be very analytical about the future. Show me your growth prospectus, show me my bonus projections for the next couple of years, etc. Frankly, if you want to change the world, you need to be analytical about the past, understanding what you've gotten right and what you've gotten wrong, and be very emotional about the future. And that is what we did. That is the team we built. So at the end of that time, 4 years ago, Africa was the largest part of the Dalberg business. Increasingly, we were having influence at the top tables of decision makers. And the story around Africa was beginning to shift from the hopeless continent to Africa rising. And at that point, I was asked to take over the leadership of our global firm. Now, standing in front of people from 40 nationalities, working in 14 offices and speaking 90 languages the last time I checked, can be a bit daunting because every single one of them has their own particular priority for how they wish to change the world. But I think what we've had to do is really ask ourselves a question: what do we have in common? It's that focus on impact, that focus on building a more inclusive and sustainable world. And keeping that at heart has then opened our eyes to a set of opportunities that a pure bottom line focus would never have allowed us to see. Because we believe in the ability of everyone to realize their potential and unlock prosperity, we were opening up offices in places like Dakar, in places like Nairobi, in places like Lagos, long before many of our competitors were doing so. Not because, again, we thought we were going to make a lot of money from it, but because we thought that's what was in line with our values. Because we were disciplined about running a lean business, we then proved that we could make those businesses work. And now, as 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies in Africa, in the world are in Africa, and as everyone is turning and saying, well, I want to understand that continent, we're able to say, we've been here for the last decade. We've built the expertise, we've built the understanding. And moreover, we're in a position to bring some of the insights, not just from the rest of the world to Africa, but ask questions about what does the experience of building inclusive growth companies and initiatives in Africa mean for opportunities elsewhere in the world. Let me make this very tangible because, I've been struck by the ideas around, the notion that we must create, we must transform, and then we must disrupt. We have tried to create a business that puts impact at the center. We have sought to transform the way that businesses think and recognize that real value is unlocked when you really sit at the intersection of government, the social sector, and commercial opportunities. And it gets really magical, for example, when you're working with the chief executive of a major bank and saying the biggest way you can build your brand in a country like Kenya is to launch the largest scholarship program ever run in that part of the continent and find a number of other people to actually fund it for you. At the same time, let's think about how you turn everyone you give a scholarship to into a future customer. But now, as we look to disrupt, the question we're asking is what other industries do we turn to? And so having started off as a consultant, then built up our business in Africa and so on, today we're working in areas like insurance, where we've launched a joint venture insurance business that seeks to underwrite particular types of risk unique to developing countries. It's focused on the idea that if you can understand development risk in a $1 trillion economy, which is what sub-Saharan Africa, once you add it all up, actually is, if you can understand particular types of development risk there, you can both unlock value downstream in allowing projects to happen, and also capture a lot of value upstream because a lot of people vastly overestimate and are willing to pay a lot for the coverage, for protection from those risks. And it's an example of bringing together impact investors who do believe in that story on the one hand, development actors who want to bring capital into some of these countries, and pure commercial investors who are looking for protection from the risks that they face on a day-to-day basis. So as we look forward, again, it's been an exciting journey so far, but most inspiring has been that ability to say yes. And look young people in the eye and say yes. You don't have to choose between a pursuit of prosperity and building a successful business, while at the same time having a real impact on the world and having a real purpose to your career. Thank you very much.
I'm going to take 2 questions. First is, what is your view about China in Africa?
China has been a transformative force in many ways, most important of which has been to bring another voice to the table in terms of opportunities for investment and growth in Africa, but also as a source of new demand. My own view, however, is it's all about bringing multiple actors. All of Asia and all of Africa are uniquely aligned in terms of the resources and opportunities that we face. And I think Africa is now on a path, following in a path that Asia has already blazed in terms of bringing people out of poverty and transforming economies. So China is both an example, an investor, a client, but also a challenge to African economies to really accelerate the rate at which they transform themselves, which is happening. And if nothing else, it's made sure that our old partners in Europe and the US take Africa very, very seriously again, because clearly someone else is.
Sure. And the last question, your experience of working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on your flagship Affordable Facility for Medicines project.
Thank you. That was a classic example of how different types of actors can come together. This facility aimed to recognize the fact that malaria is a huge killer. And today, one of the biggest risks in the world is that we will develop drug-resistant malaria around the world. So working with the Gates Foundation, we said, let's actually understand the market. Let's work with the pharmaceutical companies and create a viable market for an affordable version of various drugs. Let's understand the value chain all the way to the customer. And let's build an entirely new value proposition for the average consumer of medications. Today, we've seen the price of affordable and comprehensive malaria therapies in sub-Saharan Africa fall from an average of $4 per treatment course to something like 80 cents per treatment course, exactly due to a smart intervention in the market. It's not pure, it's not giving this away, it's letting the market work, but actually understanding how you align the interests of the whole range of actors to deliver something affordable that makes a difference and very tangibly saves lives.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, James Moore.